873-7425. I want to do, those of you who are listening in around the nation, just bear with me. All my affiliates are in Georgia. I got to do due diligence for Georgia then. Storms are bearing down across the state. There have been people killed in Coweta County in Georgia due to tornadic activity and high winds. The line of storms stretches from Columbus to just north of Macon, all the way over to just north of Augusta. They'll be bearing down on the Bibb County area where I am very shortly. Around Lake Oconee, lots and lots of lightning over Lake Oconee and Lake Sinclair. Bibb may skirt through just the worst of it. Monroe County is being pounded at this moment with a lot of lightning, a lot of high winds, a lot of storms. Headed into the Elberton area and through Athens, major weather. Most of the rest of the state now has been through it. It is a very narrow band. In fact, if I stop the radar right now, the band of radar, it's really not very wide. It's about 20 miles from the top of it to the bottom of it, 19.4 miles from the top of it to the bottom of it. It's moving rather rapidly. So those of you down in South Georgia, you're probably going to be spared it. Those of us in Middle Georgia are being hit by it right now. I can look out my window, actually, in my studio, and I can see massive lightning, but it's not raining. It's all north of me in Monroe County. All right. Having got that out of the way, a little due diligence for Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia, we'll get to President Biden's press conference. I promise we will. I can't miss it, but I think this is actually bigger news. The governor of the state of Georgia has signed legislation in Georgia to reform the elections of the state of Georgia. And nationally, Democrats and the media are going nuts. Elizabeth Warren actually tweeted this out. The Republican who's sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair just signed a despicable voter suppression bill into law to take Georgia back to Jim Crow. The Senate must pass the For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act immediately. Our democracy is at stake tonight. She actually signed that, and she probably actually believes it because she's an idiot. You also had a headline at CNN. Georgia's new law suppressing the vote is a victory for Donald Trump. Those of you nationally are hearing about this effort in Georgia to restrict ballot drop boxes. Do you know what happens if the Georgia legislature does not pass a law on ballot drop boxes? They all go away. Now, why is that the case? Well, in Georgia, ballot drop boxes are not part of the law. They were allowed because the governor of Georgia has an existing state of emergency declaration over COVID-19. As a result, the state authorized, by way of the governor's executive order, ballot drop boxes for people to drop off ballots. When the executive order on the emergency declaration goes away, the authorization for ballot drop boxes goes away. So what did the state legislature do? They legislated into law ballot drop boxes. You can now have ballot drop boxes in the state of Georgia. They can only be in boards of election or in places with early voting, and they have to be collected by close of business, and they have to be monitored, which is actually a good thing. You do not want people showing up and destroying the ballots by pouring water into the ballot drop boxes overnight when no one's looking. The hysteria over calling it Jim Crow 2.0 is a fundraising device for Democrats designed to amplify and enrage. There is no difference, and I want to be very clear here with everyone. There is no difference between the Democrats calling this Jim Crow 2.0, you got to stand and fight, and President Trump telling a crowd of supporters in Washington that you got to march on the Capitol to defend the integrity of the election. There is no difference at all, except the media thought one was invalid and thought the other was valid, but they are the same damn thing. Park Cannon, a Democrat in the state legislature, began to try to interfere with the governor's ability to sign the law last night, and people on the left are hailing her as some sort of hero for trying to disrupt the lawful process of government, and the same people hailing her as a hero were upset about the people storming the Capitol to try to stop the Electoral College votes from being counted. It is the exact same thing. What you are seeing is the hypocrisy of the Democrats and the media, who are fine when the left believes crazy conspiracy theories and upset when other people don't. In Georgia, it is the law that if you show up to vote, you must have a photo ID. You must have a driver's license number, or the state will give you a free photo ID, and you must have that number. What they've done with absentee ballots is, instead of now examining your signature on an absentee ballot that could change over time, you have to put your driver's license or photo ID number and birthday on the ballot, and that will be used to verify your identity. There will no longer be signature matches in the state, which is good. My signature on my voter registration card is different from my signature now if I sign an absentee ballot. Completely different in form and style. Now, there are a whole lot of people who are already filing lawsuits on this, and it is a fundraising opportunity. What actually is in the law? Well, absentee voters will be required to submit their driver's license number or other documentation to verify their identity. There will be as little as 1 week of early voting before runoffs, down from the current 3 weeks. Why? Because the runoff will now be 4 weeks after the general election. That's very relevant here. In Georgia, that used to be the law. The runoff happened just a few weeks after the general election. The Obama administration sued and said it wasn't enough time for military ballots, so they stretched it out over a 3-month period. It will now be 1 month from the date of the general election. We'll have the runoff. That is actually a good thing, and most voters, if they knew that, would like it. There has been widespread belief in Georgia among Democrats and Republicans that the runoff window is too long. They also will allow ballot drop boxes, which is good. They also will allow weekend voting, and in metropolitan areas, they will allow more weekend voting. Weekend voting before general elections is going to be expanded. Mandatory voting hours on 2 Saturdays statewide. Counties will retain the option to allow early voting on 2 Sundays, but early voting before runoffs will be reduced to a maximum of just 1 week before the election. And here's the one that the Democrats say is controversial. The state elections board will be able to take over county election boards that they got to intervene. This is one of those issues where the Democrats are claiming conspiracy, but it's actually good. You have, for example, Fulton County Board of Elections in Georgia is a highly incompetent board of elections. That county has hired and fired the same person over and over. That county never gets its act together. It has nothing to do with partisanship. The county is just run incompetently at the Board of Elections. They'll be able to fix this. One of the other issues is the legislation sets a deadline to request absentee ballots 11 days before the election day. That's been supported by Democrats and Republicans. This is bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans. It disqualifies provisional ballots cast in the wrong precinct. That one, I'm nebulous. I'm kind of indifferent to. The one I think is dumb is it distributes food and drinks to voters waiting in lines. I kind of think that's dumb. I don't have a problem if you want to distribute food and drinks to people standing in long lines waiting to vote, as long as there's no branding, as long as there's no politics. I don't have a problem with that. But the Republicans wanted to get away with it in large part because the Democrats always outmaneuver and find ways to make it political with wink winks and nod nods. I think it fixes problems. It did not include, by the way, the final legislation, contrary to what the Democrats are saying, it did not include a proposal to end no excuse absentee voting. They backed off of that. Now, of course, the governor signed it last night, and they're already filing lawsuits against it. There will be a left-wing judge, I'm sure, that tries to hear the case, and I'm sure will try to obstruct it and drag it out. But I got to tell you, I think that it's a good piece of legislation. Also, counties will be required to certify election results within 6 days instead of 10. Election workers will be required to count ballots without stopping until they're finished. That was my idea. I want to take credit for this one. It was my idea. I talked about it on radio. I talked about it to members of the state legislature, and they have embraced it. Under current Georgia law, you can stop, go home, come back the next day, and pick up the ballots, and hope that there's no hanky-panky overnight when no one's looking. Under the new law, once you start counting the ballots, you cannot stop. Now, to accommodate that, we will start allowing the processing and counting of absentee ballots before the election. As absentee ballots come in, they will be able to be processed now, which is another good thing. So we're not waiting days and days and days for the absentee balloting process. This is all a really good idea. It's all really good. I appreciate them doing it, and I think it's a good package. Now, the hysteria from the national media on this is going to be overblown. It's going to be over the top. They've had Stacey Abrams out everywhere championing the cause of Jim Crow's coming back in Georgia. I mean, I will go on and let's see. Do I have the clip? Maybe I don't. You got Joe Biden out there. Yeah, here we go. This is Joe Biden from his press conference yesterday. I guess he thought this line was clever.
Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off work. Deciding that there will be no absentee ballots under the most rigid circumstances. It's all designed, and I'm going to spend my time doing three things. One, trying to figure out how to pass the legislation passed by the House, number one. Number two, educating the American public. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters. The folks outside this White House. I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about voters. And so I'm convinced that we'll be able to stop this because it is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I mean, this is gigantic, what they're trying to do. And it cannot be sustained. And do everything in my power, along with my friends in the House and the Senate, to keep that from becoming the law.
Right. Jim Crow looks like Jim Eagle. I guess he thought that was clever. But more than that, this is one of the most interesting things here is that there's bipartisan agreement on pieces of this legislation. Watermarking absentee ballots, making the cutoff date 11 days before the election for absentee ballots, allowing ballot drop boxes. It'd be hilarious if a federal judge throws this out. Ballot drop boxes go away. I don't think we should have ballot drop boxes, by the way. I fundamentally am opposed to the idea of ballot drop boxes. But there you have it. The hysteria from the Democrats and the media who are not capable of dealing fairly with this legislation. They're not capable of fairly dealing with Brian Kemp in Georgia. I spoke to an event in Atlanta last night. I'm surprised I'm awake right now, to be honest with you. It was the Atlanta Young Republicans, which was a very large crowd, young and diverse, black, white, Hispanic, male, female. It was very diverse. It should give you encouragement for the future of a party. Joe Biden says he's not sure if they're going to be around in 2024. And we were talking about these issues and how to engage in the future on these issues. And one of the things that came up repeatedly is how do we do outreach into Black and Hispanic communities? Now, ironically, I'm listening to, was listening to book on tape and then reading to finish it up. Tim Keller has a new book out on the resurrection. It's actually a really good book. I cannot recommend this book enough. Tim Keller, he's probably, next to the Pope, the most famous theologian on planet Earth right now. His book is Hope in Times of Fear. He's actually going to join me next week on Good Friday on the radio to talk about this book. One of the things one of the quotes in the book is that living in Manhattan, that's highly secular, the secular elite claim they are helping the working poor, but the working poor in the boroughs of New York are relying on Jesus. The secular elite can't stand the guy, and the working poor love the guy. And it's just another reminder that the GOP can win on these cultural issues. The reason the Democrats nationally are screaming so much about Jim Crow, screaming so much hysteria about voter suppression, is because they are trying to scare people to continue to vote for him. But you know what scares people more than requiring their driver's license number on a ballot? what the wokes costing them their job because they say something that's unacceptable this week that was perfectly acceptable last week. That is why so many people are leaving the Democratic Party and moving to the Republican Party. The Democrats in the national press are scaring people over this, calling it Jim Crow when it's nothing of the like, because it's all they've got. They are a one-trick pony at this point.
Well connected and well respected. It's
This hour of the program is sponsored by First Liberty Building and Loan. First Liberty is in Noonan, Georgia. The Frost family, they've been active in conservative politics for years. Good Christian family. They've been doing First Liberty since 1993. If you are in charge of the businesses, financial decisions, and your business wants to grow, needs access to capital, creative financing, the bank's telling you no, but you need someone to tell you yes, go to firstlibertyga.com. Spend just 5 minutes with Frost family. See if they can help you. They make their own lending decisions. firstlibertyga.com, and thank you to them for their sponsorship. Let us go to the phones real quick. I am going to Theodore in Valdosta. You're going to be up first. Welcome.
Good morning, Eric. How are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good. Listen, I think you're on topic here, definitely. Governor Kemp, like him or not, is signing a piece of legislation. The Democrats scream they won't interfere with it. They're doing the same thing that they complained about last month, and of course they're also going to overturn that election in Iowa, with that has been certified by the state of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats are just completely ruthless. I don't understand why the Republicans, you can like Trump or not like Trump, but at least we have somebody out there fighting. Who do you see as far as the Republican goes that's capable of fighting back against the left?
Ron DeSantis right now is definitely one of them. DeSantis, this is why so many people, I think, on the right are gravitating towards DeSantis at this moment, is because he is one of the guy who is seriously fighting, standing up to the media, standing up to the left. He encourages a lot of Republicans in that he fights like the president against the left without actually mean tweeting like President Trump did. They're going to have to fight. Listen, the dishonesty of this coverage. I mean, and you raise something, Theodore. Let me highlight this for everyone nationwide. The media lambasted Republicans and Trump supporters for January 6th and are lionizing a woman who tried to stop Brian Kemp from signing lawful legislation last night. The media is screaming about Jim Crow and distorting the actual truth of what's happening. These sorts of lies and dishonesty, they're not really sustainable. It's just not sustainable. It destroys the credibility of the media, and the media doesn't care because the media is still so broken by Donald Trump. They think anything that Republicans do at this point is racist, and they call it racist, but also they've got to scream louder, and this is an essential point everyone needs to understand. The reason the Democrats are screaming so much about racism constantly now is because they are deeply fearful of the exit polling, and David Shore, the progressive pollster, who in a post-election survey showed a massive shift of minority voters to the GOP. Not enough to offset the white people who voted for Joe Biden, but it deeply impacted the Republican Party. Southeast Asian voters shifting, Indian subcontinent voters shifting, Hispanic voters shifting, black voters, particularly black men shifting. All of the things people were worried about happened, and happened to a greater degree than the exit polls initially reflected. And so the Democrats are amplifying their claims of racism and race scares and Jim Crow hysteria because they're trying to scare these people back into the Democratic Party. And it's not going to work because those people are driven by cultural concerns the Democrats, captured by the wokes, can no longer address.
30.
But it's all they've got. It's all they can do. They must scream and be hysterical because they don't have a path forward. You are about to hear them ratchet up the racism, Jim Crow rhetoric because they know nothing other than to do that, to try to keep people scared and with the Democrats. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let's go to Mark calling from Tucker. You're going to be up next. Welcome.
Good morning, Eric. Thanks for bringing me on. I've been looking at this whole election, the new law, trying to figure out why. What is it that Democrats are really upset about? And I think one of their root reasons that they don't like this is because this will bring Republicans back to the election in the next election, because so many Republicans didn't show up to vote for their senator. And I think this will inspire more of them to show up, because now they'll believe, okay, the election is certainly going to be something that they can believe in.
Right. You know, it's funny you should make that point. I was actually last night speaking at this Atlanta Young Republican group and told them that honestly, when you look at this piece of legislation, it really doesn't do a lot. It preserves the status quo by and large. It cleans up around the edges. It doesn't do nearly any of the nefarious things the Democrats say it does. The one dumb thing it does is it doesn't allow people to give you water while you're standing in a long line to vote. But it doesn't do all the bad stuff the Democrats say. But the fact that the Democrats are screaming and squealing over this as if it's Jim Crow come to town actually will do a lot for the psychological advantages of Republicans. I mean, the Republicans were convinced that Brian Kemp wasn't going to fight, that Jeff Duncan was going to sell him out. So here comes this legislation. It regulates drop boxes. It requires driver's license or photo ID for absentee ballots. All the stuff people wanted. The Democrats are screaming bloody murder. They've got CNN attacking Brian Kemp as a racist. This does nothing but, one, help Kemp for 2022, and two, help the Republicans in the state of Georgia be convinced that something substantive happened. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to downplay. There are some substantive things that it does, but by and large, it's not an overwhelming change from the status quo. And the result, of course, is that the elections that you go to in 2022 will not really be different from the elections you go to in 2020, but the Democrats are making them think they are, and that's actually going to help the Republican psychology. Because right now, listen, I've run the numbers. Other people have run the numbers. I've talked to the data analysts who've looked at Georgia. Georgia is still a Republican state. 400, it was wound up being the precise number, 427,200 some odd Republican voters stayed home in the runoff who voted in November. If every Democrat who stayed home, now pay attention to this, this is really important. If every Democrat who stayed home in the Georgia runoff turned out to vote, and every Republican who stayed home in the Georgia runoff turned out to vote, the Republicans would have won. You need to understand that. If every Republican and every Democrat who did not vote in the runoff but did vote in the general turned out in the runoff, the Republicans would have won. John Ossoff beat David Perdue by 52,000 votes. Warnock beat Loeffler by about 100,000 votes. Enough Republicans stayed home that even if all of the Democrats turned out and all those Republicans turned out, the Republicans would have won. Had Perdue gotten a few more thousand votes in the general, he would have never gotten into a runoff. Had Doug Collins not run against Kelly Loeffler in the general, Loeffler probably would have gotten out of it without a runoff. This was Republican self-defeat, way more so than it was anything about Democratic self-defeat or Democratic victory. And Republicans did not turn out because 75% of them believed that it was going to be stolen by the Democrats no matter what they did. And so they didn't bother. It was not Donald Trump's not on the ballot, I'm not going to go vote. It was they didn't fix the problems that caused Donald Trump to lose, so why go vote? They're going to steal it again. The Republicans have now fixed those concerns, and the legislation is way more psychological than it is practical. The Democrats screaming about it in the way they are sends a signal to the GOP that something substantive has really happened. Now, if you want to call in and talk about this, feel free to 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Karl Rove has a piece in the Wall Street Journal. Let me read you some of this. Moves by Republican legislators to reform state election laws are drawing incendiary accusations from Democrats. Former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams denounced them as Jim Crow in a suit and tie. Kamala Harris declared it's all voter suppression by any other name. The Democratic Governors Association calls Republican efforts a direct attack on our democracy. Such accusations are unfounded and damaging to the nation's political culture. In Georgia, Republican legislators are close to passing a bill that expands the state's early voting period by 4 days. What a clever Republican suppression technique. Provide voters with more opportunities to cast ballots. The legislation would also require Georgians to vote in their home precinct or risk having their ballot disqualified, and it would forbid outside groups to send duplicate applications for mail-in absentee ballots to voters who've already applied for one. Both are sensible protections. Democrats are particularly upset with requiring Georgians voting by mail to provide the number from their driver's license, free state-provided ID, or other generally accepted identification. If this is racist, then New Jersey, Virginia, and California are suppression hotbeds. New Jersey requires a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of a social security number for online voter registration. Virginia requires a photo ID card and your social security number. California also requires ID to register. Where are the bitter denunciations of the state's racist Democratic governors and legislators? Ms. Abrams and her allies also oppose efforts to toughen signature verification requirements for mail-in ballots. But what about Colorado? The increasingly blue Mile High state has what's likely the toughest such procedures in the country, which is important since it conducts elections primarily by mail. Last fall, roughly 1 of every 112 ballots, 29,000 altogether, were rejected because the signature didn't match the one on file with election officials. This was after voters were allowed to cure problems by responding to a text asking for a copy of, you guessed it, their driver's license or other photo ID bearing their signature. More than 11,000 did so. When will Colorado's Democratic governor and legislature be branded vote suppressors? They were certainly on the ball in Iowa, where Democrats unanimously opposed the election reforms Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds recently signed. Among other things, Democrats criticized the new Hawkeye state law for closing poll locations at 8 p.m. rather than 9 p.m. while keeping open times at 7 a.m. Yet Democrats have been mysteriously quiet when it comes to rules enforcing the same opening and closing times set by Democratic governors in California, Delaware, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, the Democratic governors of Michigan, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania, the Democratic legislature of Maryland, and the Democratic mayor and city council of Washington. More urgently, when Ms. Abrams and her associates castigate the Democratic suppressors who run Colorado and Hawaii, where polls close at 7 p.m. That's a whole additional hour lost. The Iowa law also drew fire for reducing the number of early voting days from 20 to 20 from 29. If this is evidence of suppression, what should we call the District of Columbia, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, New York, Wisconsin, and 15 other states, all with shorter in-person voting periods than Iowa? What about Connecticut, Delaware, and New Jersey, none of which have early in-person voting at all? Will Ms. Abrams and Ms. Harris condemn these blue states as centers of voter suppression? Both Georgia and Iowa are continuing no-excuse mail-in absentee voting, a favorite of Ms. Abrams, Ms. Harris, and the Democratic left's anti-suppression brigade. But if they're really concerned about protecting this essential tool of democracy, they've missed a couple suppression efforts. New York State is one of 15 that doesn't allow no-excuse absentee voting, along with fellow deep blue states, Connecticut and Delaware. If attempts to constrain or limit no-excuse mail-in voting are prima facie evidence of racism, what does it say about those states whose statutes don't allow for it at all? Calling Andrew Cuomo voting scandal on aisle 3. But something tells me there's no chance Ms. Abrams or Ms. Harris will condemn the absence of democracy in these Democratic states. I wonder why. The facts matter, do they not? The facts are, even with the new restrictions in Georgia, Georgia still has far more liberal voting practices. Yes, more liberal voting practices than a whole lot of blue states. My goodness gracious. That's where we are here. They don't care about the facts. I'm glad Karl Rove and the Wall Street Journal have decided to pursue this. I'm glad that facts still matter to the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But you probably won't hear any of this stuff on CNN or MSNBC. They've become emotionally invested in the idea that the votes are going to be suppressed. They've become emotionally invested in the lies that come from Democratic talking points. They've become emotionally invested in the idea that anything Republicans do to reform voting laws, even if they're more liberal than the left voting laws, maintain some level of Jim Crow racism. But meanwhile, the Democrats who actually invented Jim Crow and ran with it, and no, they're not all Republicans now. Many of them maintain their Democratic allegiances, including, what's his name, over in Alabama, who was governor there. Stay Democrat. The Democrats had a member of the KKK in the U.S. Senate. All they've got are claims of racism. That's it. All they've got are claims of racism. You need to understand why they're doing it, though. They're deeply fearful. For years and years and years, Democrats invested in the idea, along with the media, invested in the idea that demography is destiny. For years and years, members of the mainstream media, academic pollsters, political analysts, editorialists, data readers, Democratic politicians, going back to Richard Nixon's reelection, they started talking about demography as destiny. As the United States moves to become less white, the Democratic Party will be dominant. As the nation becomes more brown, more black, more Asian, the days of the Republican Party are over. And yet it's not happening. Donald Trump did better with Hispanic and black voters than Mitt Romney did or John McCain did. They moved his way not on economic issues. They moved his way on cultural and social issues. They moved his way on a variety of issues the Democrats no longer relate to or see as a concern. In fact, if anything, the Democrats believe the people who believe, as these black and Hispanic voters do, are problematic people. You get called an Uncle Tom, a house N-word. You get called all sorts of racial slurs if you believe in God and that God should be prime in your life. If you don't believe that boys should compete in girls' sports, you're somehow bad. Look at Arkansas. In Arkansas, the governor of Arkansas has signed the legislation Kristi Noem wasn't brave enough to sign. Governor Asa Hutchinson has signed SB 354, the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. The legislation prohibits boys who identify as girls from playing on girls' teams. Now, the Democratic grab bag of excuses here is, well, it's not a concern. It hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. How do you know it's going to happen? Well, we're preempting it because it's happening in other places. We're preempting it because we know it's going to happen, because every time the left brings up the excuse of, well, it's not happening. Why are you doing this now? But we know the left is about to make it happen, so we're going to stop it. Kristi Noem wasn't brave enough to sign the piece of legislation. The governor of Arkansas did. There's a report out. The governor of South Dakota tried to convince the governor of Arkansas not to sign it, to have her back. He signed it anyway. And the left, the media, by the way, the media and the left, they're freaking out. How could you sign this transphobic legislation? You know who supports this legislation? Soccer moms. Hispanic and black mothers whose kids may have rivals on the athletic court. We got all this talk about women's equality and helping women and boosting women's sports. And now the left solution is let's put boys on the team, and they just think they're girls. We'll put them on the team. People don't like that. But you're not going to hear an honest coverage of it by the media. You will not hear honest coverage of these sorts of issues from the American media because they're all in on the left's talking points. Voter reform, election integrity, it's all Jim Crow. Protecting girls' sports is all anti-trans bigotry and fear-mongering. The real fear-mongers out there are the Democrats and the members of the media who take their talking points unquestioning. The Republicans have not passed a burdensome piece of election reform legislation in Georgia. The governor of Arkansas has not signed a radical piece of legislation in Arkansas. But that's all the media has anymore, because they are desperate to keep people from leaving the Democratic Party. And ironically, in so doing, they're driving more and more non-white people out of the Democratic Party, because no one wants to be in a party filled up with white, elite, secular, woke people. Nobody wants to be a member of a terrorist organization like Boko Haram, and increasingly, the Democratic Party is the political party of Boko Haram.
You can follow Erick around social media.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I want to make an important announcement. I'm really excited about this. I mentioned it earlier. Tim Keller is probably the most famous theologian on the planet right now after the Pope. Within Protestant circles, for sure, I think Tim Keller is probably the most famous theologian on planet Earth at this moment. And he is battling pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed last year. And he has a book out. He started writing it as the pandemic settled upon America and as his diagnosis settled in. His book is called Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection and Meaning of Easter. And I got to tell you, I started reading this book and I found it to be remarkably reassuring. And his point is that in a lot of churches, most churches, I would venture to say, when you get to Easter, when you get to Holy Week, there's a lot of talk about the cross. In fact, through all year long, there is a lot of talk in churches about the cross and the meaning of the cross. And Tim Keller's point in this book is that the cross is nothing without the resurrection. Thousands and thousands of people were put on crosses by Christians or by Romans and crucified. Only one of them conquered death and came back. And one of the points he makes in the book that you stop paying attention to this point, and I'm so excited to be reminded of this point, that the Christian faith is not really a religion. Let me say that again. The Christian faith is not really a religion. I'm going to talk to him about this point. Next Friday, Tim Keller is going to join me on this program on Good Friday to talk about this book in matters of faith. Religions, what does a religion do? A religion gives you a set of ethical standards by which to live your life to get to some promised future. Typically, a religion is a belief in a divinity, and that divinity conveys to you the standards of moral, ethical living that if you live this way, you will gain some promise of eternity. And the Christian religion is not actually that. We have encapsulated it as that. Liberal Christian theology, as Keller points out, that's the premise of liberal Christian theology. Take the supernatural out and just say it's a way to ethical, morally live. But it's not really that. The Christian religion, unlike every other religion, is necessitated on a belief in a factual, historic, supernatural event. That a guy named Jesus, the son of a carpenter from Nazareth, was crucified on a cross and on the third day rose again from the dead. And your Christian religion is actually premised on that. Now, here's where it breaks away from every other religion on the planet. If you believe by faith that fact, if you internalize the fact that someone not only conquered death, but physically in bodily form resurrected from the dead, and you invite him into your life to dwell within you through the Spirit, he, not you, he regenerates you. Religions are premised on you following a path to gain eternity. Christianity is premised on you accepting as fact a historic event that is well documented, inviting that person to have a relationship with you,
30.
in fellowship with you, and then he does all the work to regenerate you. It's completely different. It's Christian orthodoxy. Christ, through this dwelling of the Spirit within you, restores you as you head into the kingdom. I'm going to talk to Tim Keller a week from today about this and so much more in his book. You can text DATA to 33777 to order his book. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. Should you like to be a part of the program, it is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I want to talk about Joe Biden. I keep wanting to say Vice President Biden after 8 years. It's hard to get used to saying President Biden, but I want to talk about that. But there are a couple of things that I want to mention first. One of which is, again, as I mentioned the last hour, I'm going to talk about this more in the third hour. And I'm just, part of it is I'm really excited by it. Next Friday, a week from today, is Good Friday. Now, since I started in radio, I decided if they're going to make me work on Good Friday, well, I'm going to do a show about Good Friday. And so next Friday, I will do my annual Good Friday show, 10 years of Good Friday shows. More importantly, I have never done a Good Friday show where I have invited on anyone to talk with me other than callers. And in the last couple of years, it's just such an emotionally grueling exercise. I tend to pre-record it, so I don't even do callers. And I got to tell you, I've decided to have a guest next Friday. I've had this thought for the last couple of years that maybe I should get on some theologians to actually like someone who has actually graduated from seminary and stood in the pulpit and written about theology, to maybe have a theologian stop by and talk about the resurrection and the Good Friday and the crucifixion and what it means. And I'm a little bit flabbergasted that the first person to say yes, the one who is willing to do it, my guest on Good Friday, the first time I've ever allowed any other voice on this program for Good Friday, is going to be a guy many of you have heard of. His name is Tim Keller. He was the pastor of Redeemer Church in New York City. He's a Presbyterian pastor. He's probably the most famous theologian on the planet next to the Pope. And he has written a new book about Easter. He has pancreatic cancer. And he's writing a book on how the resurrection gives him a lot of comfort. And so he's going to be with me next Friday. I have now read, I don't really read a lot of books anymore. And I don't read books largely because I read so much news during the day. I used to have a passion for reading, and I don't anymore. Between law school and then seminary and this program, I just don't have a lot of time or energy to want to sit down and read a book. I just want to tune out. And I sat down and read his book, and I've been captivated by it. I got it the other day, and I think it's the first time I've sat down and read a book cover to cover in maybe 5 or 6 years, really just sitting down and not like the academic reading of where you kind of skim through it very quickly to get from one end to the other, but to actually digest the book without heartburn. His book is called Hope in Times of Fear. If you are interested in reading this book, and listen, I realize for some reason, and I'm not sure why, in Orthodox evangelical circles, Tim Keller gives some people heartburn, and largely it's because he's one of the voices that says critical theory is bad. In fact, I've one of the most clarifying voices on why critical theory is bad and should be avoided by churches is Tim Keller. But Tim Keller also says that there are issues of race within the church that have to be addressed, and nowadays, if you say that, which, and it's true, by the way, but if you you're critical theory, no, he's actually been one of the biggest critics of critical theory and has given much of Christendom the language and arguments to attack critical theory. But he just actually is concerned about racial reconciliation, and he's got a real passion for urban ministry. And this book is incredible. It is genuinely incredible. I have not read a book on there. So he references, there's a book by N.T. Wright. If you know N.T. Wright, he's a Anglican priest in Great Britain. He is a theologian. I'm not a huge fan of his, but I am a fan of his book, The Resurrection of the Son of God. This book is an academic book. It is not, I do not recommend the book to you. It is so deep. I think the book is 800 pages long. I've read it, and I probably need to read it again. Keller essentially uses it for the beginning of his book. And N.T. Wright, for all of his faults, and there are many, he believes in the physical, actual resurrection of Jesus Christ. And one of the things that N.T. Wright notes is that there is this belief. I promise, I'm going to get to that. I'm captivated by this book. I am genuinely captivated by this book, Keller's book, not Wright's book. But one of the things that Keller highlights from N.T. Wright's arguments is, you will hear this often from non-believers, that every religion, ancient religion, has resurrection. And they do, actually. There are levels of it. But one of the arguments that a lot of people make is that, well, of course, those ancient idiots believed in people coming back to life. And of course, it was easy for these con men to pull the wool over their eyes that their friend had come back to life. But a bunch of scholars have actually gone back and looked at the evidence of that particular claim. That, well, of course, they all believed this stuff could happen. So, of course, and actually, you know what they found out? Among Jews, there were two beliefs among Jews, and it was a binary belief. You believed one or the other. One group of Jews flat out rejected the idea of resurrection. The other group of Jews believed in resurrection, but, and this is a big but, on the last day, there was not a single Jewish person alive on the planet. Actually, there's not a single Jewish person alive on the planet to this day who believes in a resurrection within human history of an individual. Either we're all getting resurrected on the last day or nobody's getting resurrected. That was the Jewish belief, and to this day it is. There was not in that time frame any Jew who believed that a single human could be resurrected. On top of that, in pagan literature of the time, particularly Greco-Roman literature, but also the Eastern religions and Eastern empires that border the Roman Empire that they would have come into contact with, there were examples of people coming back to life, but it was one of two ways. One was you come back to life and you are gloriously radiant in ways that no one can look at you. And the other is you come back to life and you are clearly the ghost of a dead man. And if you read the resurrection of Jesus in the Bible, it is neither one of those things. There is certainly the radiant figure of the angel, but Jesus himself comes back, and this is one of the things that N.T. Wright uses as evidence that this must be a historic account, is there is no literature, no mythology, no human storytelling, nothing on the planet, anywhere, in the Eastern or the Western Hemisphere 2,000 years ago that matches the biblical description of Jesus, of his resurrection. So if they were making it up, they made up an entirely new idea, which doesn't seem likely at the time when it would be being made up by a group of people who did not believe in the physical resurrection of an individual during human history. They could not have sold that idea to anyone because no one on the planet believed that idea. In any religion, believed that idea. And the way they describe the resurrection of Jesus is they can't recognize him until they do. There's no shining, burning glory like the Roman mythological resurrections. There's no shining, burning glory. And there's nothing like Greco-Roman mythology of Orpheus's wife or Persephone who comes back to life but looks like a dead body come back to life. Those, in fact, in the human literature are the most common forms. When someone comes back to life, they look like a cadaverous ghost or they're in burning, shining glory. You can barely lay eyes on them. And with the Christian religion, what they posit in the New Testament is that this guy comes back to life, comes out of the tomb, and he's not this shining, burning glory. You can actually lay eyes on him, but you can't recognize him until you do, for reasons no one seems to be able to explain necessarily. There are theological explanations. But then also, he is physical but transphysical. He can appear in rooms that are locked, and yet he is real. He has the visible wounds of crucifixion, but you still don't recognize him until you do. There is nothing in human history, in the literature of any religion or mythology or culture 2,000 years ago like that. That is a unique story in human history. And it's one of the evidences for it actually happening. That and the fact that, Paul essentially writes that, we got witnesses. You can go interview the witnesses, was writing at the time. And no one else claimed to have witnesses of resurrection. All of the stories about resurrection came from people who had that long ago. Oh, I remember the story my granddad told me as a kid where thousands of years ago on Mount Olympus this happened. No, this was Paul writing within decades of it happening, saying, hey, all the people who saw it, 500 of them or so, they're still alive. Go talk to them yourself if you don't believe me. That's totally unique in the storytelling. I am totally captivated by this book. I did not mean to spend this entire time on it, but I am totally captivated by Tim Keller's book, Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection and the Meaning of Easter. If you want to order a copy of it for Holy Week is coming up, if you want to read this, it is a captivating read. Text the word data to 33777. I'll send you back a link. Listen, I don't mean to bore you guys with theology. I try to only do it on Good Friday, but I have not sat down and read a book cover to cover in really barely any multiple sittings like I did this book. I was totally captivated by it. Also, knowing that this is Tim Keller struggling with pancreatic cancer, and he's trying to get this book done while battling pancreatic cancer and going through treatments. And I'm just floored he's willing to be on my radio show with me to talk about this book. And he'll be here with me next week. Now, that if you want to order it, text the word data to 33777. I'm going to go on and step out. A terrible clock management here. I shouldn't have spent this long on it, but I'm excited he's coming. I've been a critic of his over the years, and I'm excited that he would spend time with me because, I've been a critic of his largely because I've read what other people have written about what he said. And then when you go back and you actually read what Tim Keller writes and believes and says, you find out that a lot of his critics don't seem to be able to grapple with his points, and what he's making are actually good points. And I've gone from being a critic of his to really being a fan of his over time. I've had to read him a lot in seminary, and he's going to be on the program with me, which I'm just floored by. And this book is incredible. Hope in Times of Fear. Text the word data to 33777. I will get into Joe Biden and his press conference when we come back.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Scott in Augusta, you're going to be next. Welcome.
Oh, hey, Eric. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Okay, I had two questions. First thing, what was the law that was passed that first allowed for drop boxes to collect absentee ballots? The law that was first passed that allowed that.
There was no law.
Like last year.
Yeah, there wasn't one.
Oh, no law.
No.
No law.
No. Okay, so here's let me explain this one though before we move on, because this is really important. The governor issued a state of emergency for the coronavirus, and in so doing, gave power to state officials to implement directives of the Department of Homeland Security as needed to ensure the conduct of democracy. The Department of Homeland Security recommended states use drop boxes to drop off absentee ballots so people weren't flooding local boards of election. Brad Raffensperger implemented that, as did local boards of election. When the state of emergency declaration goes away, the power to use drop boxes goes away. So now, with this legislation signed last night by Kemp, drop boxes will be permissible, though regulated.
So something we didn't vote on, and our legislature didn't vote on, now we've got these newspaper dispensaries scattered in the most corrupt county in Georgia to collect forever. It's embedded in our law for good.
Well, it's embedded now, but so now hang on a second, just so you understand how they implemented it. And this is the funny.
I'm saying.
Yeah. Now this is why the Democrats are so upset about it, is because the way they implemented it is you're only allowed to have drop boxes in places where you're also conducting early voting. So at boards of election, really, or if you have spillover effect in other places where you're doing early voting. So you can only have a drop box while early voting is going on. You can only have drop boxes in locations where early voting is happening. And you can only have drop boxes from 9 to 5, and you have to have a monitor watching them the whole time.
But I really wanted to get to my next question because I could spend a day talking about the Dropbox. Fiasco. I mean, that's going to be labeled the abomination bill instead of the tax of abominations or the tariff of abominations. Right. From the 1820s. But anyway, the next question was about. And I don't mean to be so fast, but I'm at work and
that's all right.
I'm calling to get off before I get this done. Okay, can you re-explain what controversy? What controversies with David Ralston several years ago?
Oh yeah.
With his law firm and using his position as speaker to sell influence. In the criminal court cases. Yeah. Could you explain that? And also, was that ever investigated, adjudicated, or resolved in any way?
No, it was not.
Or was it just swept under the table?
It was. They did a purported change to state law that really wasn't a change. Here's what happened: as David Ralston was mounting an effort to become Speaker of the House, David Ralston sat on a panel and changed the law so that if you were Speaker of the House, you could indefinitely defer cases. Under Georgia law, if you're a lawyer in the state legislature, you can defer any case that has to go to trial while the legislature is meeting and for 30 days after the legislature concludes. Ralston changed the law to say that's not going to change, but if you're the Speaker of the House, you're always on state business, and so you can defer cases indefinitely. And then what he did, willfully or otherwise, is he essentially monetized it. People actually admitted to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution they were paying Ralston to take their criminal cases, and Ralston kept their cases out of court forever just by saying, well, I'm the Speaker and I'm busy. I can't go to court.
That's a racket.
It is.
It's a racket.
One guy paid him $20,000.
Until we hold our leadership accountable, it's like the corrupt church. Mm-hmm. As long as the church, the corruption in the church is what has corrupted this nation. And until we address the, sins, corruption in the church, it's not going to get any better.
Nope.
We're going to,
It's so frustrating to me that the Republicans. Now, let me tell you a secret. The Republicans in the state house had someone who was willing to stand up and challenge Ralston this time, and he had a majority of the votes in the Republican conference. But I am told very reliably that this person decided not to do it because Ralston made it clear between the Democrats and just enough Republicans, he would still become speaker in a vote. Ralston was going to fight it on the floor if the Republicans tried to oust him, so they didn't oust him. So Ralston is perfectly willing to side with the Democrats in the legislature to preserve power, and there are enough Republicans in the state house who are willing to side with the Democrats to keep him so that a conservative can't actually be Speaker of the House.
So we're going to be blessed with that kind of leadership.
In the state house.
But Eric, how many Republicans would it take to just refuse to vote for Ralston as Speaker for him to not be able to get through the
well, see, that's just it. If they refuse to vote, I think the number is about 51. And if they didn't vote for him, well, then he would have enough Democrats plus the Republicans who would vote for him to get it. Now, look, Scott, I got to let you go there because there's about 20 seconds left. But you raise a valid concern. The state House Republicans are only as good as the Speaker. The Senate Republicans, much better, whether you like Jeff Duncan or not. The Senate Republican leadership at the legislator level is much more conservative than in the House of Representatives. And they kind of hamstring the Senate and the governor with what the House does. and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I want to offer a theory. If you listen to me regularly, one of the things I say that is a frustration of mine these days is that both sides, not just the left, not just the media, both sides, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, members of the press, they are vastly more committed to narrative than to fact. And any fact that deviates from the narrative is a fact that must be ignored. I want to offer up a theory that deviates at the moment from what is considered acceptable right-wing narrative, but I think is actually the truth. Bear with me here. This may be too controversial for some people. What if, just what if, Joe Biden is not actually the figurehead whose strings are being pulled, who is too old to know what's going on, who's the vegetable in the room? What if Joe Biden is actually an 80-year-old president of the United States who is actually engaged but is also really freaking old? What if Joe Biden, the number of people who tell me, well, Joe Biden, he's not really the president. I mean, he's the president, but it's the other people running the show. What if instead that's not the case? It's actually Joe Biden is an active president of the United States. He's just really old. So as Brett Baer says, he gets lost in the cul-de-sacs of rhetoric as he drags out answers. If you're an 80-year-old president of the United States who actually is engaged and does make the final decision, what you also are is a man who has to have your staff deeply prep you and get you ready because you don't have the energy or stamina for it. So they prepare lookbooks that have the pictures of reporters and their names and gives him the order in which to go. They give him copious notes in which to refer to topics, and he has certain things he wants to do. And then there's this. If you're not the puppet string pulled vegetable president who is out to lunch and kept in the basement until they need your cadaverous body to make it look like you're in charge, but you actually are an 80-year-old engaged president who gets worn out like 80-year-olds do and has a foggy memory, as most 80-year-olds do, even though you're engaged, then what happens is you do tend to be more staff-driven. And at the end of the day, when you must make a decision, you are either led or, as often is the case, have things you want to do that you believe are right, and your staff that disagrees with you because they're way younger than you and more progressive than you tries to lead you against that, and your values collide, your ideas collide with your staff's values and ideas, and you get a muddled mess. Which is why I suspect when Joe Biden was asked about gun control, he answered an infrastructure question. And his brain, of course, sputters out on occasion, like when he was asked about the filibuster. He is old. He's not the guy you want in charge of your company. Really not the guy you want in charge of the country, because at 80 years old, he's winding down a life. He's got to be prepped way more and prepared way more. But ultimately, he's a man in charge of his faculties who has ideas of what he wants to do, and a staff that is way more polarizingly progressive than he is, who is trying to steer him in different directions, and it does more to confuse the situation then provide clarity for the situation. That's my theory on what's going on. That's my theory. And in so doing, I think you actually get a worse situation than if Biden were the out to lunch vegetable who they just trot out so you can see his body. Because there you would have someone with a definitive agenda. And here Biden's got an agenda that may be at odds with the staff that's trying to prep him. And Biden wants to go in one direction, they want to go in a different direction, or they want to head towards the same goal in the same direction, but Biden is off at a different angle than they are, inevitably, therefore arriving at a different place than they are. And it causes chaos within the White House in ways that are different from the chaos of the Trump administration, where you had an establishment that wanted him to do X and Trump wanted to do Y. That was different from Republican orthodoxy. Biden and the wokes all want to kind of go in the same direction. They just want to go at different degrees from each other, and that's going to cause ultimately more problems. That's my theory, and I think it bears out in the press conference. When you saw Joe Biden sputtering out in certain questions, going in weird directions and failing to actually land on a definitive idea on repealing the filibuster. He chimed in on the voting rights and voter ID stuff as Democrats would. Never really went aggressively at the Senate, never really wanted to tackle immigration in ways clearly some of the reporters wanted him to tackle. I think Republicans hurt themselves by thinking that Joe Biden isn't really in charge, is out to lunch, and not competent and capable of making decisions. I think that when we internalize that narrative, we're going to be surprised to our detriment. But when we realize that Biden really is in charge and his staff is further left than he is, we have opportunities to poison the well between Biden and his staff and the rest of the Democratic Party that disrupt things in our favor. And I wish we would go in that direction. To the press conference, when I say his brain sputtered out, if y'all missed this, this is Joe Biden at the press conference.
What we promised the American people. And in order to do that, in a 50-50 Senate, we've got to get to the place where I get 50 votes so that the Vice President of the United States can break the tie, or I get 51 votes without her. And so I'm going to say something outrageous. I have never been particularly poor at calculating how to get things done in the United States Senate. So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh, sing me, Miss Kim.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Oh boy! All right, and here's this one on Biden talking about the Republicans and their divisions. Listen to how the Republicans are dividing the country.
When I took office, I decided that it was a fairly basic, simple proposition, and that is I got elected to solve problems. And the most urgent problem facing the American people, I stated from the outset, was COVID-19 and the economic dislocation for millions and millions of Americans. And so that's why I put all my focus in the beginning. There are a lot of problems, but all my focus on dealing with those particular problems. And the other problems we're talking about, from immigration to guns and the other things you mentioned, are long-term problems. They've been around a long time. And what we're going to be able to do, God willing, is now begin one at a time to focus on those as well. And whether it's immigration or guns or a number of other problems that face the country. But the fundamental problem is getting people some peace of mind so they can go to bed at night and not stare at the ceiling wondering whether they lost their health insurance, whether they're going to lose a family member, whether they're going to be in a position where they're going to lose their home because they can't pay their mortgage, or the millions of people are going to get thrown out of their homes because of the inability to pay their rent. So we're going to move on these one at a time, try to do as many simultaneously as we can, but that's the reason why I focused as I have. And here's the deal. I think my Republican colleagues are going to have to determine whether or not we want to work together, or they'll decide that the way in which they want to proceed is to just decide to divide the country, continue the politics of division. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to move forward and take these things as they come.
So Joe Biden believes the Republicans are dividing the country by opposing his campaign promises. Joe Biden seems to be a president who someone's told Joe Biden he has a mandate to lead when he doesn't. He's just not Trump. He's got no mandate to lead. He just wasn't Donald Trump. If you think Joe Biden has a real mandate, why did Republicans almost take back the House of Representatives? Why did Republicans pick up state legislatures around the country? Why did Republicans do so well in the election? Because they were Republicans, not Trump. Joe Biden was the only alternative to Trump. It had a lot more to do with Donald Trump than it had to do with Joe Biden and his ideas. People didn't care about Joe Biden's ideas. The idea that the Republicans are somehow dividing the nation because they're opposing his ideas, the nation itself is divided.
With regard to the filibuster, I believe we should go back to a position of the filibuster that existed just when I came to the United States Senate 120 years ago.
I think he was trying to make a funny there. I'm not sure. 120 years ago, the talking filibuster, back when he came to the Senate 120 years ago. Okay. All right. Well, one more here.
Well, no, treating the root causes in Latin America doesn't change things overnight. How do you realistically and physically keep these families from coming to the U.S. when things will not get better in their countries right away?
Well, I can't guarantee that, but I know, that old thing, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. You know as well as I do. You cover it. You have serious. It's not like somebody's sitting on a hand-hewn table in Guatemala. in somewhere in Mexico or in Guadalupe saying, I got a great idea. Let's sell everything we have. Give it to a coyote. Have them take our kids across the border into a desert where they don't speak the language. Won't that be fun? Let's go. That's not how it happens. People don't want to leave. When my great-grandfather got in a coffin ship in the Irish Sea, expectation was he going to live long enough on that ship to get to the United States of America? But they left because of what the Brits had been doing. They were in real trouble. They didn't want to leave, but they had no choice. So I can't guarantee we're going to solve everything, but I can guarantee we can make everything better.
It was very interesting in this press conference. The media actually turned on itself. They blasted the White House press corps for not asking about COVID, barely asking about gun control. They were pretty upset with the press. Ron Klain, the White House chief of staff, retweeted a left-wing reporter who was upset that the White House reporters did not ask about COVID progress. And then there's this. Greg Sargent is a reliable mouthpiece for the left at the Washington Post. He's like a less stupid Jen Rubin, just as predictable, though. Here's his headline. At Biden's presser, bad questions adopt a right-wing frame. What does that mean? It means that he's upset that reporters were taking Republican criticism seriously and asking Biden about them. At Joe Biden's first news conference as president, the dominant topic was immigration. That's because young migrants overwhelming our facilities are all over the news these days. Unfortunately, some lines of questioning were dominated by tacit acceptance of Republican and right-wing readings of the current migrant influx and the longer-term challenges the issue poses. That's objectionable on its own, but treating the issue this way also fails to advance the cause of genuinely holding Biden accountable on it. You got that? It's objectionable, but also because it stops you from being able to hold Joe Biden accountable. Really? Really? This is a left-wing criticism? Naturally, of course, the idiot Jen Rubin thinks that Joe Biden was substantive and deep, and it was the press corps that was all the problem for daring to ask questions that Republicans might like. Good gracious. What you're seeing here is that when you have a Democratic president, some members of the media are appalled that any reporter would dare ask a question that might make the guy look bad when he actually deserved the tough questions. And many of those reporters did not. I really thought that I tried to urge my newsroom that carried it live to underscore it with some porn-sounding music, because some of these reporters, I was surprised they could even ask him questions the way they were carrying on. I mean, the thigh sweats from some of these people was incredible. The glowing hagiographic praise from some of the reporters. You had the PBS reporters like, Mr. Biden, why are you so awesome? Why are you so awesome? Why aren't you going to stop the Republicans? Come on, Mr. Biden, stop the Republicans. I mean, that was the PBS reporter. It was absurd. It was offensive. And then you had another question like, are you going to run again in 4 years? Is Kamala Harris going to be your vice president? Is Kamala Harris going to run with you? Are you going to have a ticket with her? Are you going to challenge Donald Trump? Are you going to run again? Are you going to save us? Are you going to save us? That was like a CNN reporter asking this. You got a chance to address the president of the United States of America, and you're going to obsess over whether or not the guy is going to run again in 4 years? Really? When you got so many other questions you could ask? Just the ridiculousness in the White House press corps.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show.
Hello, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. 7425. I was just asked by a reporter about the legislation in Georgia signed by Governor Kemp that isn't this acquiescing to Donald Trump's demands. No, it's not really. There are a couple of things people need to understand. In Georgia, the ballot drop boxes would disappear if this COVID state of emergency expires. Why? Because they weren't legislated by the legislature. They would go away. They're only there as part of the emergency declaration, because one of the parts of the emergency declaration from the governor was to follow Homeland Security directives. And it was Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security that urged ballot drop boxes so people wouldn't be flooding local boards of elections with absentee ballots. The COVID state of emergency goes away, the ballot drop boxes go away. So now the Republicans have actually liberalized Georgia law by allowing these ballot drop boxes, but they've done it in such a way that Democrats hate, because they can only be used 9 to 5 during early voting as long as there's two people there to monitor them. And that's one of the keys here. According to the Republicans in the legislature, you're going to have 2 separate people overseeing the ballot drop boxes to minimize hanky-panky. But also, and this is really important, the legislation really doesn't do a ton, if we're honest. The legislation really doesn't profoundly disrupt the election or change the election or change the rules or anything of the like. What it does is it provides an opportunity for the Democrats to scream bloody murder about Jim Crow. And what that does is psychologically, positively impact Republican voters who are convinced that the election's going to be stolen, and now suddenly hear Democrats screaming so loud about election reform, they presume that, well, we must have fixed it. I mean, the whole thing here, and this is really, really, really important, the whole thing is that these Republicans in Georgia are convinced that the Democrats are going to steal the election. And by having the Democrats scream about an election reform package that really doesn't do a whole lot, improves the psychology of the Republican voters in Georgia. I mean, the Republicans in Georgia, they may have shortened the runoff window, and they may have shortened early voting, but they expanded weekend voting. They legislatively mandated weekend voting, even in counties that have refused to do it. But the Democrats aren't happy about it. And by screaming as loudly as they have, by Stacey Abrams doing the walk of shows where she goes on each one and shames the GOP, she and the Democrats are signaling that they think this is a bad bill, and that means the Republicans are going to love it. And as a result, they'll come back to the polls, and the GOP still has dominant numbers in Georgia. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number, if you want to be on this here program, is 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. Have y'all, Charlie just sent me, where is this now? I had it and then I closed it. Now let me get it again. The cargo ship that is stuck in the Suez Canal. I saw somebody yesterday on social media say, they need a second shipping lane, and they can have the Suez Canal. Yeah. The shipping container, though, this massive ship is stuck. It's the Ever Given. It's blocking the Suez Canal. This is CNBC. It says that it is affecting 12% of the world's seaborne trade. A prolonged blockade could lead to significant disruptions to global trade. Analysts are highlighting the increased risk of attacks on oil facilities amid even greater energy supply chain vulnerability. The behemoth cargo ship stuck in the Suez Canal and blocking traffic in one of the world's most important maritime trade choke points isn't set to break free just yet. The Ever Given, a 220,000 megaton ship, nearly a quarter mile long, with a 20,000 container capacity, ran aground after being blown by strong winds while entering the Suez Canal from the Red Sea. It has completely blocked the passageway that is home to 12% of the world's seaborne traffic, through which 50 container ships transit per day. Tugboats and dredgers are currently working to dislodge the ship, which has been stuck since Tuesday evening. The operation could take weeks, one of the executives involved has warned. While we believe and hope the situation will get resolved shortly, there are some risk of the ship breaking up. In this scenario, the canal would be blocked for an extended period of time, which would result in significant disruptions to global trade, skyrocketing shipping rates, further increased energy commodities, and an uptick in global inflation. The crisis is another blow to the global supply chain after a brutal year ridden with delays, shortages, and price squeezes on the back of the coronavirus pandemic. The shipping delays could impact everything from clothing and shoes to gym equipment, electronics, food, and energy supplies. Gas prices could go higher. Suez Canal container blockage to further rattle global supply chain, issues a J.P. Morgan research note. The Suez Canal, 120 miles long, is a key transport point connecting east to west. 20,000 ships pass through it yearly, transport everything from oil and gas to machine parts and consumer goods. While it's still early to say what the full impact of the tanker crisis will be, the bank expects that in the near term, the blockage is likely to add to supply chain worries. The delays could be more than 50 days for many ships whose alternate is sailing around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern end of Africa, which analysts say would increase shipping time by up to 30%. The immediate impact of delays in the canal will center on European-Asian trade, adding delays to already disrupted supply chains affecting oil and refined products. The Ever Given's misfortune has already impacted oil prices. News of the Suez blockage drew in buyers, and along with other economic data, contributed to international benchmark Brent crude's 1-month futures contract gaining its biggest one-day gain in nearly a year to close at $64.41 on Wednesday. In the meantime, between 5% and 10% of all seaborne oil is transported through the Suez, meaning that for each day that the ship remains stuck, it delays the shipment of an additional 3 million to 5 million barrels of oil per day. Several tankers carrying jet fuel and gas oil are held up on the Persian Gulf Europe route, as well as empty tankers crossing to pick up North Sea oil. All right. We in this country will be better than most because our supply lines between Europe and Asia aren't really impacted. The Asian route for the U.S. comes across the Pacific. The Europeans come across the Atlantic. From Asia to Europe, though, you got to go through the Suez Canal. And now they can't, so they got to go around. And that's going to be a problem for a lot of people in Europe as prices go up. But there's something else here that's going to happen. Before I get there, though, y'all listen, I'm going to apologize for doing this because I know how many listeners I have in the Middle Georgia area where I am broadcasting. And until we start picking up affiliates out of state, I just continue to feel obligated to do this to some degree. But there is a storm bearing down on me here in Middle Georgia. And it is there. The National Weather Service has issued an advisory. If you are in Middle Georgia, you've got to be careful. This storm has 50-mile-an-hour winds and pea-sized hail and heavy rain. Minor damage to tree limbs is expected. Heavy rain could cause street flooding. If you are in Buena Vista, Butler, Roberta, Talbotton, Cassetta, Reynolds, Junction City, Geneva, North Fort Benning, Upatoy, Brantley, Juniper, Macon, Fort Benning, Oakland, Forsyth, Zebulon, Howard, Tazewell, you've got this storm coming down on you. Butler as well down there, for sure. The National Weather Service is advising people to stay off the roads. This is a very strong storm. It is bearing down on the Middle Georgia area. It'll impact Macon and Warner Robins here in the next 20 to 30 minutes. If you're in the Bolingbrook area, the Culloden area, the Yatesville area, the Thomaston area, Reynolds, Fort Valley, you're going to get smacked by the storm here in a little while. In the same way, if you are over in eastern Georgia, in Rennes, Gibson, Edgeville, Mitchell, if you are on Lake Oconee or Lake Sinclair, if you're headed into the Augusta area, you have a terrible storm bearing down on you. It is not considered a severe thunderstorm, but it's got pea-sized hail in it. We're dealing with this front coming through the state of Georgia. And that reminds me, I should give just a quick shout out to Georgia Power, because I don't know if you guys have seen the pictures, but in Coweta County, Georgia, storms blew through, took out trees and power lines. There was a potential tornado as the storm came through in the early morning hours. People have died, and Georgia Power got out there while the storm was still raging and began getting people's power back on. It has been a mess through the state of Georgia. And again, I realize we're getting to the point where the show is about to start growing outside the state of Georgia. And I will probably not be doing weather forecasts for people inside Georgia on this program for a whole lot longer. But right now, all of my affiliates are in Georgia, and we have a massive storm blowing through our state from north to south. If you're in North Georgia right now, all of our affiliates are in the clear. If you're in South Georgia right now, you've got the storm approaching you, so be careful. Brunswick and Valdosta, you're going to be off the hook, it appears. It's just everybody else from Vidalia to Swainsboro to Statesboro to Dublin to Macon, to all the way up to Athens and over to Columbus and Carrollton. You're just going to get smacked by the storm. Now, I will move on, and I want to make a point here about the shipping container. Events change things. I say this all the time. I think it was Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister, who was asked what could happen to disrupt his parliamentary majority in Great Britain after World War II. And he turned to the young man who asked him and he said, "Events, dear boy, events." Joe Biden has been warned that his stimulus package could heat up the American economy so much that inflation could become a thing. And if inflation becomes a thing, tax increases could become a thing. Because if inflation goes up, what's going to happen is you're going to have a interest rate increase in the American interest rates that deal with the American debt. And so in order to keep up with interest payments on the federal debt, when interest rates go up, you're going to have to increase taxes across the board, even to the middle class. And the Biden administration said, don't worry. It's no big deal. We're not going to heat up the economy. Larry Summers, a respected economist of the left, he's wrong. It's all right. Now, in the Suez Canal, a gust of wind has shoved a boat on its side, and the boat is run aground, and it's blocking one of the world's most important shipping channels. So oil and gas can't get through. So prices in Europe are going to go up. those energy prices are going to be reflected in the prices of goods and services. That's going to cause inflation. The world for some time has been able to skate by with low inflation in large part because energy prices have stayed low. The Biden administration has resumed a policy very much akin to the Obama administration policy, whereby they incentivized increases in the price of oil and gas because they wanted to decrease people's driving and use of fossil fuels. What they did along the way was they subsidized wind and solar and nuclear, well, not really nuclear, but wind and solar power and biomass power to try to offset the increase in fuel costs in the energy market, because energy plays a direct role in inflation because the price to produce a good requiring energy goes into the price of the good overall. The result is going to be inflation in goods. And as that inflation goes up, it's going to be reflected in interest rates. And as interest rates go up, the Biden administration is going to have to respond with tax cuts, with tax increases. There are already members of the Senate who are talking openly about tax increases. There are already members of the United States Senate who believe, who are pushing, who are advocating for massive tax increases on the rich and on companies. The problem is, as you increase the taxes on the rich and on companies, you either chase capital out of the United States or you drive up costs that are passed on to the American consumer. And the Democrats have discovered essentially whether it is a new math, a new economics, where they say that's not really true, it's not going to happen, except it is. And they're willfully denying it's going to happen. And it's going to hurt the economy. There are so many media reports out right now about an economic boom about to happen in this country, that Joe Biden's economic recovery plan is going to spark an economic boom. We hear this uncritically from members of the media, and I don't necessarily think it is. And part of it's going to be because a gust of wind turned a massive shipping container ship on its side and blocked the pathway of goods flowing from Asia to Europe, and it's going to spark price increases and commodity price increases, and it's going to spark inflation. And it's going to come at a time the American economy is going into overdrive because of the Biden stimulus plan, and it's going to cause inflation, which will cause tax increases, which will cause a recession, which may cause the end of the Biden presidency, with the Democrats denying the whole way that it'll ever happen. Events change things. It's one reason Joe Biden should not have said, for example, that the Republican Party may not be around in 2024. The Republican Party actually did really well in the elections in November, other than the presidency. The Democrats are starting to get overconfident. There's a crisis of overconfidence, a crisis of overreach. Matt Continetti, writing in the Washington Free Beacon, talks about this Operation Overreach by the Biden administration. We'll get into that when we come back.
He doesn't just have a radio show. Erick has a website too. Visit E.W. Erickson every day for the podcast, clips of the show, and Erick's in-depth written analysis.
Everybody's voting for the friendly voice of radio.
Jim, have I done Omaha Steaks yet?
Music, weather, sports.
That's coming up in the next segment.
Excellent.
Everybody's waiting voice of radio, the people's choice. Big fry, small fry, dawn to dawn, it's radio that turns them on. Swinging, singing, a million sounds you want to hear. It's a landslide every year. Everybody's diving in the smiling voice of radio, the people's choice. East Coast, West Coast, in between, it's radio that makes us see. Wherever you go, you can listen to the news. You can swing with the blues on this wonderful, wonderful station. Just take a lively companion wherever you go. Take a portable radio. Take a portable radio.
Hey, look alive! Everything lights up, makes you want to shout. Talk about happiness, that's what we're talking about. Nobody won't bring you happiness, but we know who will. Come on now, smile, get happy, yeah.
You're listening.
Yeah, like all the time I'm listening.
To the station that swings.
This station really swings me.
Swingingest sounds in music.
Ooh, swingingest, ringingest.
It's the station that swings.
Ooh, like this station's really got me in orbit.
Music. That's our middle name. Music. Time to get up, get out of bed. Fill your cup and get ahead. Educates, syncopates, radio communicates. Radio, the sound of year-round pleasure.
Omaha Steaks this segment.
You can be live on Erick's show by calling 877-97-ERIC. That's 877-973-7425.
Hello and welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You want to do something fun over the next week? My kids have spring break this coming week. I can't do anything with them. I got to be here with you guys with the shake up in my schedule. But I'll still find time to grill out. And I will be grilling Omaha Steaks. I got some bacon wrap fillets in the other day. Omaha Steaks is great. They age their beef at least 21 days. That's when the magic happens. The flavor comes out, makes it more beefy, more intensely beefy in a great way. You can go right now to omahasteaks.com and put Georgia in the search bar, and you'll see the butcher's best sellers. And you get chicken, you get pork, you get hand-cut fillets, you get the pork chops, you get kielbasa sausage, you get burgers, you get caramel apple tartlets, you get a complete package from Omaha Steaks. Literally, you're going to get the main course, the side, and the dessert from Omaha Steaks. It's an incredible value. And if you order right now, you're going to get 4 free burgers and 4 free chicken breasts from Omaha Steaks. What you do is go to omahasteaks.com and put Georgia in the search bar. You will see the Butcher's Best Sellers pack. You can get it. Get the 4 free burgers, the 4 free chicken breasts right now. 4 burgers, 4 chicken breasts. But there's more at Omaha Steaks than just that package. You can add into it other things and make it an incredible package from an already incredible deal. And here's the thing with this package. You can't get the quality and you can't get the value at your grocery store. But you can get it all at omahasteaks.com. Go to omahasteaks.com, put Georgia in the search bar. It's an incredible deal. It's an incredible value. It's really tasty. I know. I bought it for myself. So when I first started doing this package, they did send me one to try it. And now I've had to order like 2 of these myself, paid for out of my pocket. Plus, I love their pre-sliced chicken breasts and their bacon wrap fillets. So I get those all the time as a standalone order. I love Omaha Steaks. I really do. Am a customer. You will be too. You will develop a great relationship with them long term like me. I've been an Omaha Steaks customer for probably 25 years. omahasteaks.com, put Georgia in the search bar. All right, Matthew Cottonetti. He is at the Washington Free Beacon. I want to read you part of what he wrote. A liberal president enters the White House in a time of national crisis. He campaigns as a moderate, but soon reveals his intent to govern from the left of the center left. His bold agenda has plenty of fans among journalists and academics who celebrate the expansion of the welfare state. They write stories and deliver sound bites likening the new chief executive to FDR. The end of Reaganism, they say, is at hand. I'm referring, of course, to President Barack Obama. Shortly after his election in 2008, Time magazine portrayed him as Dr. New Deal, complete with fedora and cigarette holder. It would seem that Obama had been studying the 1932 Great Depression campaign of Franklin D. Roosevelt, wrote E.J. Dionne in a syndicated column. Conservatism is dead, announced the New Republic. It has been the kind of presidency, gushed John Meacham in 2009, Barack Obama moving as he wished to move and the world bending itself to him. Take a moment to recover from that last bit of purple prose. Barack Obama moving as he wishes to move and the world bending itself to him. Then recall that 2 years after Obama's victory, Republicans won the House. In 2014, Republicans kept the House and won the Senate. And 2 years after that, Republicans won complete control of the federal government. Conservatism didn't die, the New Republic did. Now, the same wonks and historians who compared Obama to the architect of managerial liberalism downplay his tenure in office as overly cautious, modest, and risk-averse. They've settled on a new FDR, Joe Biden. And Biden is ready to play the part, even if it means risking Democratic control of Congress. Biden met recently at the White House with a group of historians who, according to Axios, share his view that it's time to go even bigger and faster than anyone expected. If that means chucking the filibuster and bipartisanship, so be it. Biden's closest analogs, Michael Beschloss told the news outlet, are FDR and LBJ. E.J. Dionne says Biden represents a new disposition through which pragmatic forms of government activism add up to a quiet political revolution. And Biden loves the growing narrative that he's bolder and bigger thinking than President Obama, writes Mike Allen. No doubt he does. You would think that, in the midst of all the pandering and praise, the scholars who talked to Biden might have provided him some actual historical perspective. Every president Biden is said to recall, including Reagan, had to endure numerous setbacks, crises, unforced errors, and unanticipated consequences of their own policies. By 1938, the New Deal was exhausted, the economy hadn't recovered from the Depression, and FDR won his final 2 terms largely on the basis of his international stature. LBJ's landmark 1964 victory was followed by a shellacking in 1966 and the collapse of the Democratic coalition in 1968. The GOP lost 26 seats in the House in 1982 and forfeited control of the Senate in 1986, and when he left office, Reagan handed his vice president a giant deficit, the savings and loan debacle, and a zealous special prosecutor. The historians urging Biden to go big on policy aren't analysts. They're partisan cheerleaders. If they step back, they would see that Biden is weaker than the presidents he admires, and that vulnerable Democrats are warning the majority against overreach. They are.
15.
Even Chuck Schumer today, according to Politico, is supposed to be hesitant to get rid of the filibuster, knowing what's coming next. there. It is Erick Erickson here. I want to shift gears a little bit. I was speaking last night at an event in Atlanta, the Atlanta Young Republicans, and one of them commented, as some of you have commented, that I could spend every day for the rest of my multi-decade radio career talking about the wokes and would never run out of material. And that's true. One of the things that I talk about on radio, I'm sure there are other people who talk about it on radio, conservative talk radio. I maybe talk about it more than I should, or the intersection of faith and politics and culture and faith. And I get told more and more these days that I should stop altogether talking about this particular topic, in large part, if I ever want to grow into a national show. There are a lot of people who think you can't talk about these topics, even on conservative radio, that they're bad for you. And younger listeners don't necessarily care for them, but it kind of defines who I am. I don't try to do it a lot, but it certainly shapes my worldview. But as we enter Holy Week, I spend a little more time on it and essentially devote my entire Good Friday show to the topic. But as I've mentioned a couple of times in the show, I've been reading this book. I've read now the book by Tim Keller. It is Hope in Times of Fear. Tim Keller has pancreatic cancer. He's probably the most prominent theologian in Protestantism on the planet today. He's going to join me on Friday next week to talk about his book. But there's a passage that struck me, and it's relevant to a lot of what we've talked about in the last several weeks about the rise of the wokes and how they're canceling people and demanding everybody shut up if we disagree with them. I want to read you part of this because it gets to a relevant point that needs to be said. In the midst of skyrocketing deaths from the coronavirus, protests over a different kind of death erupted in the streets during the early summer of 2020 following the murder of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis. The demonstrations happened in over 2,000 U.S. cities and around the world, drawing millions of people, making them the largest such social protests in our history, far larger than those during the civil rights movement of the 1960s under Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Nearly all of the current protests have been focused on the ongoing racism in our society at large. But being old enough to remember the civil rights movement protests firsthand, I've been struck by a contrast. Our recent protests and calls for social justice, as encouraging as they are in so many ways, have little of the same sense of hope that the earlier movement had. In Dr. King's masterpiece, his I Have a Dream speech, he says, "This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangled discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day." King's reference to cutting a stone of hope out of a mountain of despair is a reference to David 2, 34, 35, 30, and 44, Daniel chapter 2, verses 34 to 35 and 45. The chapter was the divine vision of the future given to the king of Babylon in a dream. In that vision, the idolatrous kingdoms of the world are smashed by a small rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, which then grows into a mountain of justice and peace that fills the earth. Christian interpreters have understood the stone as the kingdom of God, a supernatural work not by human hands, starting as quite a small thing, seemingly powerless, yet eventually toppling all proud regimes that perpetuate evil and oppression. Dr. King used the image with great rhetorical skill, but the image is more than rhetorical. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, Jesus says in Matthew 13. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Dr. King did not let the financial and political powerlessness of African Americans in the United States dash his hopes. The hidden systemic racism and the overt racial exclusion and violence that the civil rights leaders faced in the 1950s and 60s were enormous. But he knew that God moves in this way, from small beginnings and weakness through sacrifice and service toward change. Dr. King was not merely a sunny optimist. Read his speeches and letters and you can see anger and realistic fears about the movement, but the note of hope remains. It has often been pointed out that the civil rights movement was led by African American pastors and Christian leaders, and so the biblical references that fill their speeches and calls to do justice were not merely grandiloquence. They were statements of faith and hope rooted in God. Death, pandemic, injustice, and social breakdown, we again desperately need a stone of hope. And there's no greater hope possible than to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. St. Paul says he was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by God's power. If you grasp this great fact of history, then even if you find things going dark, this hope becomes a light for you when all the other lights go out. It's why Paul can add, likewise, we are weak in him, yet God's power, we will live with him. Now, he goes on to note, and this is my point of reading this passage, and I can't recommend this book enough. It's not actually about the wokes or justice. It is literally about the resurrection and meaning of Easter. That's just his introduction. One of the things Keller notes is that the modern calls for social justice by the left, he doesn't say the wokes, but I will, that's what he's talking about. The social justice calls, they are devoid of hope. They are devoid of any recognition that we need a savior. We ourselves are our own savior, and there is no hope for eternal life. We have this planet, and it ends in fire, and none of us escape, and the universe will forget about us. It's not a cheery optimism, and there are a lot of people out there who say, well, it may not be cheery optimism, but it's realistic. You people who believe in mythology like Jesus, you just want to put your hope in fake things and not have a real grasp of the situation. But actually, we're grasping with the reality of an eternity. And the left in this country does not. Every single one of us, I believe is made in the image of God. And every single one of us hears that voice in our head that asks, why are we here? Here's that voice in our head that says there must be more to it. There's that voice. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. You hear that voice. You hear that desire for justice. All of us have a desire for justice. Every one of us has a desire for justice. Every one of us has a desire for righteousness. Every one of us has some idea that some things are fair and some things are not. And you have now on the left this idea that we ourselves are empowered to cure the injustice, to bring about the righteousness, and to make straight the paths to get to some level of fairness. Except we're a broken people filled with sin. We can't do it. But all of us have that little voice in our head. Why are we here? You know, sometimes when it's quiet, this is part of the craziness about the pandemic. This is part of the craziness about life right now is we are isolated. So many of us are isolated, but we have less quiet time because we're engaged in social media. We're engaged in the internet. We're watching the news. We're watching TV. We're filling it with interactions that are digital instead of in person. And so we don't listen to the quiet voices. We don't set aside time in prayer or in quiet meditation, dare I use that word. And we don't necessarily hear the voice anymore, but that voice is there. And if you just listen, just be quiet for just 1 second. Just be quiet here. Just listen. Not to me, not to the sound of the radio. All of us have within us that little voice. Why are we here? There must be more than this. what purpose do I have? And a lot of people who reject, they spend a lot of energies to suppress the voices, the crazy voices in your head. We're not supposed to hear those voices. And people who believe those voices in the imaginary sky god, that they mislead the world, they corrupt the world, they pollute the world. And it's the one who seizes the reality of this is all there is. The worms will eat my body and people will forget about me. And one day the whole world will end and the universe will not care. The cold void of space will consume us. Those are actually the people living the lie. But they're living a lie that echoes eternity. They're living a lie that tries to recreate a reality, and it's a reality from the little voice in their head that they still can't quite suppress. It's a reality that says we've got to bring about a heaven. And instead of looking to eternity, they look to the here and now. Instead of looking to a God to bring justice, they look to themselves to bring justice. And it's a justice, it's an idol, it's created in their image. And so the wokes go out and they decide they're going to bring heaven to earth because heaven isn't real, but heaven is a concept that they have within them because they were made in the image of God. So heaven is real, but they've decided they don't think it is, and they're going to make it real by bringing it to earth. And they have to bend all of humanity to them to form some level of justice and righteousness and ethic that makes them feel good, that makes them feel like they reflect something that is within them. Again, this is, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse, but they suppress it, and the echo's still there ringing in their ears. And the wokes want to bring about a heaven that they don't believe exists on earth. And their salvation is a deeply sad and pitiful salvation. Their salvation is dependent on you shutting up or going away, because they can't get their heaven on earth as long as those who disagree with them are still out there. They work overtime to indoctrinate your children at a political level to advance their kingdom on earth, at a theological level to get your children to stop hearing the voice in their head that they hear that wonders, why am I here? There must be more than this. And they concoct schemes and theories about religion, that religion is trying to live a righteous moral life through mythology. And again, it's the Christian religion that sets itself apart from so many others. And Tim Keller gets into this in his book, Hope in Times of Fear. That when you analyze the religions of the world, Christianity truly is unique. Every religion on planet Earth echoes something of Christianity. But Christianity itself doesn't really echo anything of them. All of those religions echo an idea of a moral life, of an ethical life, to live in some way. But Christianity is actually completely different, because Christianity is actually premised on the belief that you have to accept a historic event, an event that you have a lot of people saying isn't true, but you've got to accept that event, and that is the actual physical resurrection of Christ. Keller spends a lot of time in his book criticizing liberal Christian theology that believes it's metaphor and not reality, and essentially acknowledges you cannot be a Christian unless you admit and embrace the physical, actual, real, historic resurrection of Jesus Christ out of the grave. And if you can do that, then unlike every other religion that provides you a path of how to live your life, Christ himself does it within you, regenerating you, as he himself was regenerated out of the grave. Amino acids coming back, the heart beginning again to beat, things like that. What we see with the wokes, and you can only really truly understand them at a theological level, is they're speaking into a void that they themselves have created because they've refused to allow it to be filled with the presence of God, and they themselves have decided that they must fill it. and they themselves must bring a heaven to earth, a utopia that they'll never actually get. And as they try and try, they get angrier and angrier because their utopia fails every time, because what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to subvert the order of the way things in life were actually created while ignoring the little voice telling them actually there's a better way. And that way, as Keller reflects in his book, going full circle here, is the civil rights movement of the 1960s was foundationally built on faith in Christ, that there was a hope that we could move to a better day where, guess what? We do not see each other's skin color. We judge each other by our character, not our color. And the wokes twisted and perverted. There is no hope. And we must look at skin color. They get it exactly the opposite. That's why they're so angry. These people need a lot of prayer. They need Jesus. They don't have it. And this book, I can't wait to talk to Tim Keller next week about it. I hope you'll be with me here with it. But that explains, just so you understand what's really going on here. And so for all of you who are disheartened and in despair that, man, the woke seem dominant, we're not going to be able to push this back culturally. Yes, you always will. Just not in the way you think. We always think that we will go forward, and God's got a sense of humor, and he oftentimes turns things on his head. You take a giant like Goliath, and he's slayed not by a soldier, but by a farmer's youngest son with a rock. Things turn differently than the way you think, but they work out in the end for your benefit. All things work for the good of those called according to his purpose. If you're interested in reading this Keller book, I can't recommend it enough. Text the word data to 33777. It is, again, the first half of the book is on the evidence for the physical resurrection of Christ, and the last half of the book is on why you must embrace it and what it will do when you do. It's such a good book. I can't wait to talk to him next week.
Honest news and conservative views.
Never separated from
Well, there is breaking news we should discuss here. The sheriffs of Colorado, of Arvada, Colorado, confirm that the shooter in Colorado, he had a background check. So we've been told that we need universal background checks that will stop these shootings. This shooter had a background check and was cleared to buy his gun. And, well, there's a problem. He cleared the background check. So, of course, now we're going to have to ban all the long barrel rifles, of course. That's what we're going to have to do. Never mind that we're not going to get rid of handguns, and you can also do a lot of damage in handguns. Meanwhile, over at the Federalist, Sean Davis tweets that the Federalist has obtained Hunter Biden's ATF Form 4473, in which he claimed to not be using or addicted to illegal drugs in 2018 when he purchased a handgun in Delaware, despite at the time so being. Will there be any investigation here as the president calls for gun control? Hunter Biden, apparently his wife, threw the gun in a dumpster. The left is outraged by the Politico reporting this. On October 23rd, 2018, President Joe Biden's son Hunter and daughter-in-law Haley were involved in a bizarre incident in which Haley took Hunter's gun and threw it in a trash can behind a grocery store, only to return later to find it gone. Delaware police began investigating, concerned that the trash can was across from a high school and the missing gun could be used in a crime. But a curious thing happened. Secret Service agents approached the owner of the store where Hunter Biden bought the gun and asked to take the paperwork involving the sale, according to two people, one of whom had firsthand knowledge of the episode. The gun store owner refused to supply the paperwork, suspecting that the Secret Service officers wanted to hide Hunter's ownership of the missing gun in case it were to be involved in a crime, the people said. The owner, Ron Palmieri, later turned over the papers to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which oversees federal gun laws. The Secret Service says it has no record of its agents investigating the incident, and Joe Biden, through a spokesman, says he has no knowledge. Days later, the gun was returned by an older man who regularly rummages through the grocery store's trash to collect recycled items. The incident did not result in charges, but the alleged involvement of the Secret Service remains a mystery. One law enforcement official said that at the time of the incident, individual Secret Service agents at the agency's office in Wilmington, Delaware, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, kept an informal hand in maintaining the former vice president's security. The Secret Service declined to answer. Why was the Secret Service involved? We got multiple people who say they were, and the Secret Service won't comment. Why? Maybe Joe Biden needs to deal with gun control in his own family before trying to disrupt all of our Second Amendment rights. He probably needs to take this and deal with